Okay, chapter 16, policies, procedures, and people. Go ahead and log into SoCredit one last time so that we can go through. Don't cry, I know it's hard. It's so hard. We're going to talk about a review of some environmental controls and what our, especially server rooms, should look like. Fire suppression and HVAC and things like that. Different kinds of social engineering attacks. And then some legislative and organizational policies and the different kinds of documents and what they mean and what they're used for. So, in terms of fire suppression, we have some different classes of extinguishers. The one we use for electrical stuff is the Class C, which, if you can remember copper, as in copper wiring, copper cabling, that will help you remember that. A is an ordinary, like paper fire. B is some kind of liquid or gas fires. B for butane. Butane is apparently a highly flammable gas, so that can help you remember that part.
Did you have a question about those layers?
Not that I remember. It's a big test thing. A Class D, things that are combustible, titanium, lithium. Class K is for kitchen fires, cooking fires, so remember the K, kitchen. The ABC, dry fire extinguisher you might see, is used for things in the Class A, B, and C category. But it's one of those that's messy and sprays the stuff all over everything, and then you have to clean it up, and it might ruin things in the process. Then there's a CO2 extinguisher, so that takes all of the oxygen out of the air, and we kind of need that to breathe. So that's not the kind of thing you use around people. There is an example of that, the halotron. That is a new version of what we called halon. Back like 10 years ago, we figured out that's really bad for the environment, so they came up with an alternative, which was halotron. And those are clean agent extinguishers, which means there's no messy stuff to clean up with afterwards. Different kinds of sprinkler systems, the wet pipe system. So that's just a bunch of water hanging out in pipes up above the ceiling. If something happens, the sprinkler comes down and everything gets saturated with water. Obviously not the kind of environment we want for our electronics, because that'll just ruin everything, right? A dry pipe system, they're pressurized. It only gets sent through as necessary during some sort of fire. And then the pre-action, there has to be heat or smoke or something to trigger it to come on. You can't just go turn it on. One of the special ones, the ones that you might see a question about, is the FM200. So I'll show you all the simulation on that. It's very short. So here's what that looks like. You might use this in addition to the pre-action systems or the dry pipes. So it triggers, there's a fire, the sensor can tell. An alarm goes off because they want people to get out of the room, and then it sprays really high concentration.
Is that the same thing they have in like scientific labs where it just blows down and just looks like air
Yeah.
on top of everything?
Yeah. It does that for a little bit, extinguishes whatever it needs to, and then it quits.
So it's like a mist, it's like misty, so it won't damage anything.
Yeah. So it might leave some film on something, but it's not going to be like tons and tons of that foamy stuff, you know. So costs a lot of money to do, but especially in like a server room environment or something where that it makes a big difference, lots of people tend to use things like that. So we talk about HVAC. HVAC stands for heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. So especially a server room or something that's got a lot of technology in it, no matter what kind of technology it is, you want some kind of heavy-duty air conditioning system. Some people will install one that's just specifically for the room with all the technology, so it can give it all of its attention. We know what kind of environment do computers work best in.
We're talking regular computers or servers?
Doesn't matter, really.
Colder.
Colder, a little cooler, and a little humid, right? If it's too humid, it degrades the equipment. If it's not humid enough, when you touch something, it can spark and kill one of the components. So you want to keep something, it needs to be cool and have a little bit of humidity to it. So the HVAC is part of what keeps us in that environment we want to be in. And we want to put the devices, any pipes, anything, away from all the equipment. If you're going to use a sprinkler system throughout the building, don't put it in the server room, give the server room something else. It's not going to ruin all the equipment. Another question they like to talk about is hot and cold aisles. So this picture is an example of what that looks like. So essentially the front of the computer, where it's sucking in the cold air, all those are going to be faced down one aisle, and then the hot air is going to be centered towards the middle. So you end up having a cold aisle, a hot aisle, a cold aisle, a hot aisle, and so forth. And that just helps to better circulate the air and push it through more efficiently. So that's something that can be done. It doesn't really cost any money. If you want to, you can install air conditioning units that will kind of suck out the hot air of the room to keep it cooler. Works a little more efficiently. The SCADA, SCADA for short. So that is hardware monitoring devices like pressure gauges, electrodes, temperature sensors, and stuff like that work with the software that run on the administrator's workstation so they can adjust the environmental controls within the server room in a real-time environment. Shielding we've talked about with cabling especially. We want to protect against our electromagnetic interference and our radio frequency interference. So the shielded twisted pair cable, of course it's got, standard Cat5 cabling has a shield around it, but the STP has shields around each individual wire inside of it, which makes it more resistant to interference. So that's a good idea in that kind of environment. And we might even have a shield or something around the air conditioners to keep them from generating something. So if you have that close to a server room, that can cause problems. Yeah.
I just thought STP cables had like shields on the outside of it.
No. STP and UTP have that, but STP have separate shields, like really thin looking tin foil wrapped around each individual wire inside the cable. The Faraday cage, that is generally around an entire server room. You will make the whole room a Faraday cage, which is just putting equipment around it to shield it from emanating things outward. So you certainly don't want someone with some kind of device to be able to come in, stand outside the room, and get the data that's emanating off of it and be able to steal that data or manipulate it. There's some standards that the government has created for this, and that's the Tempest standard. It's really, you don't need to know what the Tempest standards are so much as that's the government standard for emissions of data and keeping things from happening. Okay, social engineering, we're all familiar with social engineering. Manipulating a user into revealing something confidential or doing anything really that's going to be detrimental to the user. So the reason it works is because the users are not aware. So the best way to combat that is to make them aware, right? So some of the techniques that are used, authority. So you should give me this information because if you don't, I'm going to tell your boss or I am your boss. Intimidation, impersonating someone else like a member of the IT department. Some sort of urgency or emergency. I have to get your password because if I don't deliver this presentation in 10 minutes, we're going to lose this big deal. So you better give it to me right now. And they panic and they end up giving it. Grooming some sort of trust or familiarity or something, liking to the person. Persistence and patience over time. Relating to them in some way. Using the company jargon that makes them think, hey, they're part of the company, they know these things about it, so they must be legit. Facts, proof, embedding questions with conversations. I've heard the IRS is really bad about that when they audit you and try to be all friendly with you to figure out, oh, how often do you go out on your boat? You know, and things like that. How much did that cost you? You know, in the last, I guess a couple of years ago, the calls from Microsoft are a form of social engineering. Lots of people fall for those. Hey, I'm from Windows, and you've got something wrong with your computer, and they pull up Event Viewer, and they see all these things that they're not really errors, but it scares them. And they say, well, if you just let me remote in your computer, I'll fix it all for you. And they end up wiping out a whole bunch of things, or holding their files ransom or something. So that is a form of social engineering. They're trying to go, oh, your computer is so messed up, you really need some help with it. I fell for this one time when a company started calling, saying that I needed, like those posters that they have, it's like, you're right as an employee and all that. I had to have that posted in my business for labor laws. So I paid like $120 for the student posters because they scared me. Well, if you don't have this by such and such date, you're gonna get fined, and it's gonna be a really big pain, and I fell for it. And to this day, they still send me things. Apparently these posters update like every week, and you gotta pay $120 every time for it. It's a bunch of hooey, right? It's not legitimate, but they scammed me totally, because they scared me. You can do something as easy as make a fake badge up. Say you're from corporate and carry out a clipboard, because people with clipboard always look official, right?
Exactly.
And you can just walk on in like you know what you're doing. All those things are forms of social engineering.
Consider espionage.
What did we say espionage was? Corporate spying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. Don't do it though, but it could be done. Only use your power to do it. Pretexting, you invent some kind of scenario and hope that they're going to give some information because of it. Somebody who works for the organization but maybe has some sort of ulterior motives, they're spying essentially. Trying to take responsibility for a shipment by diverting that to a nearby location. Apparently in electronics that's like a really big deal, and there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment every year that happens to it and it gets lost. Somebody else diverts the shipment using social engineering, and then they sell all the equipment, and it's just gone. Didn't know that was such a big deal until I started reading about it. Derivatives of phishing, anything to obtain some kind of private information. Spear phishing is at a specific target. Whaling is when you go for like the CEO. That's the CEO of the corporation. So you're hitting the big whale, right? And phishing is phishing over voice. So there's a few derivatives of that worth knowing. And a hoax is just something that deceives people into believing something that is false. Just go on Facebook if you want examples of that, because it's everywhere, right? Everywhere. So we prevent that with our user and education. We say don't ever give out PII. What does PII stand for? Personally identifiable information, right? Anything that helps identify who you are. So an ID number, a password, a PIN number, anything like that. Shield your keypads and your screens. Screen shields are real popular, especially in medical professions, so no one that's not right in front of the computer can see. A clean desk policy, what does that mean? Just keep your desk clean?
Don't leave like a password.
Yeah, don't leave things out, like any PII on it. So it's a bad idea for me to like print out y'all's evals and then leave them on my desk, right? Because anybody could just walk in and pick one up and, how would I know? Screen email and phone calls, especially email, especially. Use encryption. Don't use unknown media. Don't pick up a flash drive in the parking lot and go plug in your computer, see what's on it, like we learned in cybercrime. Right? We watched that episode. Anything sensitive needs to be shredded. I always,
Sit doing someone else.
I always shred, like if it even has a student's name on it, I shred it, just to be safe. If there are company policies in place, you have to be aware of them to be able to comply with them. Most people, when they come onto a business, they just, yeah, I agree, right? But you should know that and then track and expedite any shipment so you know where they're going. Sensitive data is defined as something that there would be some sort of loss to the company if it got out. If the people who weren't supposed to have the information had it, there could be a loss. It could be monetary, it could be a reputation loss. So there's different classifications of this. These are somewhat general. Different companies address this in different ways. Whether something is top secret, secret, confidential, it should just stay internal. But if somebody else in the public finds out, it's not really going to hurt anything. Or public information, anyone can have it. There's a gradient to this. It can be more or less complicated. So our PII, again, is our personally identifiable information. Anything that can be used to identify a person. There are lots of acts that have been passed. We went over these in fundamentals, but I would definitely know at least the bottom 3 of these and what the difference are. So the Sarbanes-Oxley, the HIPAA, which we know, HIPAA Health, we can kind of put that together. And then the Graham-Leach-Biley Act with the juvenile VA. And then FERPA is of course the one that applies to y'all and your personally identifiable information. But I would definitely know those. Some of the security policies we might see an acceptable use policy. Every time you log into a computer everywhere, you go through some sort of acceptable use that you have to click OK. Even here, we have that everywhere. So that's, hey, this is the thing you're supposed to use this computer for, or the network for. Change management, if anything changes in a computer or a device, a configuration of any kind, it needs to be documented and have a structure be backed up before a change is made, things like that. Separation of duties, we've talked about before. You have to have more than one person to complete a task, like 2 people having to sign a check. A mandatory vacation, everybody has to take so many days per year as part of their annual leave to make sure nothing fishy is going on or they're being contacted by anybody. Maybe they have some kind of deal under the table going on. So when an employee is hired or terminated, there should be some sort of list of these are the things we do. So when they're terminated, what do we do to their user account? We suspend it, we disable it, we don't delete it, right? When they're onboarded, they need an account made, they need an email account made, they need a user account made on the domain, etc. There's all the things that they need to be able to work. Due care, trying to mitigate risk, we talk about that, due process, respect and safeguard the personnel's rights, and then user education and awareness, which we talked about several different ways we can do that. So every time when CryptoLocker comes out, there's some sort of communication in some way to the staff. Hey, this is a new threat, this is what it looks like, this is what it does, this is what you need to do to safeguard against it. These are some actual documents. I know I had several questions about this on my test. We're going to watch a video about these vendor documents and what they contain.
When working with third parties or outsourced services, there are certainly technical agreements in place, but there are also legal agreements in place as well in the form of interoperability agreements. You can think of this if you're working with a third party that provides you with web hosting or with payroll or with management of your firewall. In each of those cases,
Yeah. What's up?
Full screen?
Oh, sorry.
there's probably data that is being seen, viewed, or stored by a third party. And in that particular case, there needs to be an agreement of what happens with that data. You might also be concerned with the hiring process from the third party, especially if they have access to sensitive information. You might also want to know more about the access controls that are in place so that if somebody is at the third party, they're only going to have access to exactly what's required to perform that third party service. If you're planning to start this relationship with a third party provider, you may want to consider getting your own legal department involved from the very beginning. That way, if there are any problems during this process, those particular issues can be resolved at the very start of this relationship and not once things have already begun. One common agreement type is a memorandum of understanding. This is not a legal signed contract, but it is a memo that is sent from one side to the other that talks about things that are important to consider during this relationship. Things like the confidentiality of data or anything else that needs to be brought up and understood by both sides. If a third party is providing you with services, there's probably also going to be a service level agreement. This is going to define what the minimum is going to be for those services that are being provided to you. And it might also provide you with information about how much uptime is expected or what the response times might be for certain issues. There's also usually penalties involved with this service level agreement so that if the service levels aren't met, you will then be compensated in some way. If you're manufacturing product or you're reselling someone else's manufactured product, you might also have an agreement in place called a business partners agreement. This particular agreement defines the role of each side and defines during this business process what the terms are for reselling the equipment and restrictions that might be placed on a reseller. If you're part of the United States federal government and you need to connect to a third party, you might also be required to have an interconnection security agreement or an ISA. This ensures that the connection that's being built between your part of the government and the third party will have the proper security controls in place to make sure that all of that information will stay secure.
So a good example of a CompTIA question, which of these agreements is not a legally binding document? What would your answer be? MOU. That's informal, right? Okay, disposing of computers. I had a question about this, but we will address in a second. Okay, so having a procedure in place to get rid of things, because we're going to have to do that, right? Normally a company has a set life cycle. After X number of years, you have to replace it. Here it's 5. For 5 years it needs to go, which is kind of generous to me.
I was doing the Pearson quiz yesterday, and they mentioned that one question about what do you do, how do you dispose of it. I thought it was, at first I thought it was, basic, it's the same time.
That's the thing that I had a question about, sanitizing or purging of information. So, yeah.
I'll talk about
Purging is necessarily purging would be, to like, just get on there and try to take it.
Get on what?
That would, purging would be considered trying to get the information instead of getting rid of it, right?
Well, purging and sanitizing is taking the data that's on it and overriding it to the point that there's absolutely nothing left that could be recovered. So sanitizing and purging are the 2 words they use for that. So formatting, if you're formatting a hard drive, you could still go back and pick up pieces and maybe piece things back together using forensics.
So if I wanted to wipe my entire hard drive, everything that's on it, how would I sanitize it?
You need some piece of software that does it for you. And there's free stuff out there on Harman's Boot CD, like the all-in-one CD with all the stuff on it. There are tools on there that will overwrite the disk however many number of times you choose. So the DoD standard, I think, is 3 times. If you overwrite it 3 times, there's no possible way that you can piece anything together after that. So that's what sanitizing is versus formatting, which, okay, you know, maybe you deleted the partition, you put a new one in, you installed Windows. If anything has not been overwritten, it's not gone. It has to be overwritten to be gone. And that's an excellent question, and that's something you definitely need to know for the rest. I feel like y'all could very definitely have a question about that. So equipment, we have to put it in a temporary storage place, analyze it, sanitize it so there's no way anybody can ever get any information off of it. So for example, TSTC is a state entity, right? So anything that we have in here is state property. So when it comes to getting rid of something, they have to be very careful about that. Because what if there was student information on a computer? Or there was some sort of file that could be pieced together to get something out of it? They have to go through great pains to get rid of that data and overwrite it to their standards. And then recycle or donate any items as required. I always told people at the shop, if you're really that worried about your data, just take the hard drive out, take it home, take a hammer to it. I mean, that's,
That's what I always tell people, that's probably they ask, so what should I do if I had this hard drive or something, what should I do? I'm like, honestly, blow it up. Shoot
Yeah.
something. Or you just-
you got a drill press at home?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Burn
done.
holes in it.
I shot one with a 12 gauge.
There you go, use it as skeet, there's another good, as long as you're a good shot, right? But, yeah, lots of different things you can do. But there should be a process for disposal, and definitely know that sanitizing and purging, what they are versus formatting. And here's some more of that. If you clear the data, it can still be recovered. If you purge it, if it's going outside the company, it needs to be purged, can't be reconstructed. And then if something's destructed, it's destroyed through, incineration or skeet shooting, hammer and
Explosions.
getting anger out. Yeah. You can just put it in a Ziploc bag. So there's kind of our 3 different ways to remove data. Of all of them, destruction is the one that you can't ever use it again, right? It's just gone after that. Incident response, another thing that's kind of new to us. So when we're talking about our procedure for responding to an incident, so an event occurs in security terms, and then after that, if it's bad and something has happened that we need to recover from, we have an incident. So we identify, we say, okay, well, there's an incident, that's step 1. Now we have to get over it. 2, contain it, isolate the problem, try to contain it in some way so that it doesn't spread and cause more damage, right? Step 3, gather evidence. So there, when you gather evidence, you could take screenshots, take
The log
recordings, log files, things that are in the cache, following your order volatility, which we've talked about previously. You're just gathering all the information that you can about what happened. Firewall logs, it was a network attack, right? And then investigating exactly what happened and then why did it happen. Once we figured that out, then we get rid of the attack. We try to recover, retrieve data. If something's been broken, we repair it. Then we get everything back up and running as soon as possible. Then we document it so that we know any procedures or changes we need to make to keep that from happening again. So that's how we talk about getting through an incident. So some of these forensic procedures we might need to gather this evidence with. A hash of a system image, essentially copy the image. If you're going to do any sort of forensics on something, you do all the tests on the copy, not the original. When we make a copy of an image of a hard drive or something, we run a hash against it, we know it hasn't been changed, and everything's just the way it should be. Analyze data with some sort of software tools. Forensic Toolkit is the name of one that's real commonly used to go back and see what happened when, what's been changed. Take screenshots with like a digital camera. Reviewing any network traffic, any captures, any logs. If there's some sort of surveillance, if there's been a physical attack on something, go to the video footage and see what happened. The order volatility, I do want to watch a quick video about that. Take statements and track man hours. Forensics people may go, well, I don't know, they're doing what they do, but they don't make anything unless they track their hours so they can be billed. So we're going to talk about the order of volatility. One of the common simulations on Net Plus is click and drag the order of volatility. I was totally ready for that one on the internet. Didn't even get the question. But watch this little video about order of volatility, and then we'll go on to the subreddit.
What's the rule about doing audio surveillance? Remember you
You
mentioned
can do
that.
audio surveillance all you want, but if you do video survey, no. You can do video surveillance all you want, but if there's audio added to it, you have to have a sign up. Yeah.
A big part of incident response is dealing with intrusions, dealing with incidents, and specifically how you deal with those from a forensics level. Forensics is talking about the collection and the protection of the information that you're going to gather when one of these incidents occur. There are data sources that you get from many different places, not just on a computer, not just on the network, not just from notes that you take. There's a combination of a lot of different places you go to gather this information, and different things that you can do to help protect your network and protect the organization should one of these incidents occur. If you'd like a nice overview of some of these forensics methodologies, there's an RFC 3227, Google that. It's called Guidelines for Evidence Collection and Archiving, and it's a good set of best practices, very high level on some of the things that you need to keep in mind when you're collecting this type of evidence after an incident has occurred. There is a standard for digital forensics, and digital forensics itself could really be an entirely separate training course in itself. There's so much involved with digital forensics, but the basic process means that you acquire, you analyze, and you report. Those three things are the watchwords for digital forensics. Those are the things that you keep in mind. We're going to talk about acquisition analysis and reporting in this and the next video as we talk about forensics. The details of forensics are very important. You need to get in and look for everything and anything. You need to know how to look for this information and what to look for, and you have to be someone who takes a lot of notes, a lot of very detailed notes. Sometimes the things that you write down and the information that you gather may not even seem that important when you're doing it, but later on when you start piecing everything together, you'll find that these notes that you've made may be very, very important to putting everything together. In forensics, there's the concept of the volatility of data. And when you're collecting evidence, there's an order of volatility that you want to follow. The volatility of data refers to how long the data is going to stick around. How long is this information going to be here before it's not available for us to see anymore? And that's one of the challenges with digital forensics, is that these bits and bytes are very electrical. In some cases, they may be gone in a matter of nanoseconds. Other cases, they may be around for a much longer time frame. So the idea is that you gather the most volatile data first. The data that has the potential for disappearing the most is what you want to gather very first thing. The data that could be around for a longer period of time, you at least have a little bit of time that you could wait before you have to gather that data before it disappears. So this order of volatility becomes very important. So what's volatile and what isn't? Well, when you look at data like we have, information that might be in the registers or in your processor cache on your computer is around for a matter of nanoseconds. There's these registers are changing all the time. That would certainly be very volatile data. If we could take a snapshot of our registers and of our cache, that snapshot's going to be different nanoseconds later. So that's one that is extremely volatile. Next volatile on our list here, these are some examples. This is obviously not a comprehensive list, but things like a routing table in our cache, kernel statistics, information that's in the normal memory of your computer, those would be a little less volatile than things that were in your register. Next down, temporary file systems. Those tend to be around for a little bit of time, but being a temporary file system, they tend to be written over eventually. Sometimes that's seconds later, sometimes that's minutes later. Next is disk. When we store something to disk, that's generally something that's going to be there for a while. Unfortunately, of course, things can come along and erase or write over that data, so there still is a volatility associated with it. If we catch it at a certain point, though, there's a pretty good chance we're going to be able to see what's there. Remote logging and monitoring data, if there's information that went through a firewall, there are logs in a router or a switch, all of those logs may be written somewhere. The problem is that on most of these systems, the logs eventually overwrite themselves. Sometimes that's a day later, sometimes that's a week later, sometimes it's an hour later, but generally we think of those as being less volatile than something that might be on someone's hard drive. The network topology and physical configuration of a system, that again is a little bit less volatile than some logs you might have. And down here at the bottom, archival media, a DVD-ROM, a CD-ROM, something that's stored on tape somewhere and archived and sent somewhere else. probably we can have as one of the least volatile data sources you can find, because it's unlikely that that particular digital information is going to change anytime in the near future.
Okay, so thinking about that, on this slide, it says capture screenshots with camera. Why?
You have a risk of losing it, the archival media is really loose policy.
Okay,
It's gonna take you longer to take a screenshot with the computer than if you just had a camera ready on the computer.
maybe true, but not what I'm thinking of.
You don't have to.
Okay, so if I took a screenshot with a computer and tried to email it to myself, there's the possibility that I'm gonna overwrite something, right? So that's why they specify the digital camera. That seems like a good thing to know, right? If you're actually doing something on the computer, you're running the risk of